This presentation looks at the SWITCH program, and this presentation was created by Kelly Kosovic, Jessica Roberts, and Jignatia Shah. SWITCH stands for Screen Time Weight Loss Intervention Targeting Children at Home. This study was a randomized trial and was published in the 2014 International Journal of Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity. So an overview of this study was, the objective was to determine the effect of a home-based, family-delivered intervention to reduce screen-based sedentary behavior on body composition, sedentary behavior, physical activity, and diet in overweight and obese children. The methods were children and their caregivers were randomized to TV monitoring devices, education or training, and usual behavior to reduce child screen time for a 20-week intervention period. A little bit of background is they define this as screen-based activities such as watching television, playing video games, and using computers are common sedentary behaviors among young people and have been linked with increased energy intake and overweight. Active involvement of the parent may be particularly important in ensuing the effectiveness of screen time intervention, as well as previously home-based sedentary behavior interventions have been limited by focusing primarily on the child. They had small sample sizes and there were short follow-up periods. This study looked at a few behavioral approaches. The first was the social cognitive theory, or SCT. This refers to the triadic reciprocal relationship between the personal, environmental, behavioral factors and the environment. SCT explains how people acquire and maintain certain behavioral patterns while also providing the basis for intervention strategies. In this study's intervention, they focused on implementing changes to the home and family environment, as well as providing suggestions for parents to make personal and behavioral changes, which were outlined more in the article. The second behavioral approach is the behavioral economics theory, or BET. According to this theory, choices to engage in a physical activity involves choosing this over a competing sedentary behavior. For example, choosing to walk to school rather than drive with a parent is dependent on two factors: the relative ease of access to the competing activities, as well as their enforcement, or in this case, enjoyment factor. So some people may choose to walk because they enjoy it, while others may drive because they hate walking. A key tenet of BET is that modifying one behavior will result in subsequent changes to another related behavior. Also, BET posits that physical activity and sedentary behaviors are related as behavioral substitutes. Therefore, if you decrease time spent being sedentary, it may lead to a substitution with physical activity, as this time is reallocated. A key focus was to train the primary caregivers to initiate the change in the home environment, to facilitate behavior changes of the child, and to implement the behavior change strategies. Three elements of this behavioral approach were offered to families. 1, provision of behavior change strategies. 2, assistance to budget media time. And 3, an activity pack for children. So, to look at the methods and procedures, the participants were overweight or obese children, as defined as the Cole International Cut Points. The children are 9 to 12 years old. They used electronic media such as television, video games, or computer for at least 15 hours per week, and they were excluded if they had a medical condition that precluded them from participating in regular physical activity, or if they lived in more than one household and spent equal time at both households. The study design was a 20-week treatment and intervention program. Assessments were undertaken at baseline and 24 weeks post-randomization. At the baseline visit, physical measurements of the child's height, weight, waist circumference, and body composition were recorded. Throughout the study, self-reported measures of sedentary behavior, physical activity, diet, and enjoyment of sedentary behavior and physical activity were also assessed. Height and weight of the primary caregiver was also measured, and then a 7-day physical activity questionnaire was administered. All these measures were then repeated at the 24-week visit. Primary caregivers were offered education and support to implement the strategies to reduce the children's media use. Also, they tried to provide culturally relevant education to these primary caregivers so that it would be applicable to whatever situation they were in. Role modeling and observational learning were key tenets of SCT, and reinforcement value is a key determinant of behavior choice according to BET. So both of these were very important in this study. Caregivers were encouraged to include praise, positive reinforcement, environmental control budgeting, and self-monitoring, positive role modeling, and offer alternative activities to screen-based media. Families also received a brief monthly newsletter outlining additional strategies for reducing screen-based sedentary activities, which included a description and rationale for using the respective strategies and practical advice about implementing these. A website was also provided to support the intervention content and included the monthly newsletters in electronic format, additional tips and information for reducing screen-based activity, and alternate options such as playing board games, doing homework, arts and crafts, using one of the items for the Switch activity pack, playing outside, and being physically active, as well as links to community-based activity programs. What they were measuring for outcomes was the primary outcome was to be the change in a child's BMI. A secondary outcome was body weight, waist circumference, percentage body fat, self-reported measures of daily physical activity, total sedentary time, sleep, dietary intake, and perceived enjoyment of physical activity and sedentary behavior. So they kind of wanted to get a whole overview of how the child was. And the third measure, which was another secondary outcome, was actually of the caregiver, which they looked at the caregiver BMI as well as self-reported physical activity of the caregiver. This table shows that the treatment group were balanced in terms of baseline characteristics. However, there were no significant changes in BMI, waist circumference, fat-free mass, fat mass, percentage body fat, measures of physical activity, sedentary behavior, self-reported dietary intake or sleep, or parent caregiver BMI between intervention and control groups. So as you can see, none of these p-values were statistically significant. There were strengths to this study. The sample was more heterogeneous in terms of ethnicity and included substantial numbers of Pacific and indigenous Maori children who experienced the greatest burden of obesity. Also, our intervention focused primarily on reducing sedentary screen time rather than incorporating other health messages, and utilized the TV locking device in addition to several behavioral modification strategies, two strategies that have been identified as important intervention features associated with greater reductions in sedentary screen behaviors in children. So the study did look at what had worked before and tried to incorporate that into their study. There were limitations to this study. As compared to other studies, this study did not use more objective measures, including TV monitors that captured screen time, due to certain logical reasons which were not mentioned in the study. The intervention did not have the intended effect on the target behaviors, the sedentary time versus physical activity. Hence, the lack of effect on body mass is unsurprising. This lack of effect may be explained by the bias associated with self-report measures, the lack of intensity associated with the intervention, and/or poor compliance. There are also some technical issues with the time machine not working with satellite or pay TV or on household computers. This time machine is what recorded or froze the screen from being used by the children. So this may have limited the capability of the device to help with the family budgeting of screen time. Now, these limitations were all taken from the report. So SWITCH is one of the few trials to examine the effects of an intervention on both child and caregiver outcomes. Increasingly, there is evidence to support the importance of targeting caregivers in child obesity interventions, as caregiver behaviors affect the child's behavior either directly or indirectly. Given the importance of the parent and caregiver in influencing the home environment, it's not surprising that the children's behavior did not change when there was no observed change in the caregiver's behavior. The level of caregiver intensity appears to be an important determinant of intervention success. Future studies may need to increase the contact time with caregivers to assist them to elicit change at the family level. This may include decreasing TV time, increasing physical activity time, as well as specifically targeting things such as iPads and iPods. While this study did have its limitations, it also allowed us to see a possible way to help control the obesity epidemic through behavioral changes in both the child as well as the parents and the caregivers.